Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Zinni, and I'm a costume designer, and I've worked at PSF for probably over 24 seasons. My very first show there was way back in 1994. I designed A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Dennis Razzie was the director, and Father Schubert was the artistic director. That was my very first intro to PSF. I am a graduate of Allentown College, now DeSales University, and Dennis was my professor in undergrad. So it was really awesome to be able to transition into professional theater and work with him as a director. And I love Shakespeare so much, so getting to dive in with a show like Midsummer was pretty incredible. And the other thing that I like to mention about that very first production is what has become a huge family and friend connection over all of these years really started that very first season. It's the first time that I met Jim Helsinger and Suzanne O'Donnell and Greg Wood and Jane Ridley, who happened to be my professor in graduate school at Penn State. It was the beginning of my love for Pennsylvania Shakespeare. So I would love to talk to you guys about costume design and what my process is like, and also what it's like depending on the style of show, and also what it's like designing specifically at Pennsylvania Shakespeare. So one of my particularly favorite seasons was the summer of 2012, which was the musical Sweeney Todd and the play A Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And obviously these are two completely different shows, and I would love to share what my process is like. So Dennis and I, obviously, as I mentioned, have a long history of doing the musicals together. Well, actually, I didn't mention that because I mentioned Midsummer, but I loved doing the very first musical at PSF, which was The Man of La Mancha. That was an incredible undertaking and an amazing experience. And that was the beginning of my journey through doing musicals at PSF. So for Sweeney Todd, I love Sweeney Todd, I love Sondheim, I love the darkness, and we really wanted to dive in and create this world that was, you know, a nod to what it's always been, but also take it to another level. So there was kind of a sexy darkness to it, and we were lucky enough to have two amazing actors, Dee Rossioli and William Michaels, who are both very attractive actors, incredibly talented, of course, but I wanted to highlight what their strengths were and sort of bring that into the design. So what I like to do, no matter what the budget is, so at PSF, obviously, we're on a specific budget monetarily, and we're also on a time budget, so to speak, because the season just, goes at a clip. So you have to figure out which pieces you want to design and which are going to be pulled or rented, and go from there. But I particularly like to render the whole show as if we're building it. So I love the research and the design aspect of it, getting all of the images, and then sketching the whole show as if we had endless money and as if we were building the whole thing, so that I don't feel limited when I'm actually designing the show, so that the creative process is just free. And then you end up with this, epic design. And then the next challenge is how do we make this happen with the money and time that we have? For Sweeney, I definitely loved the idea of doing exaggerated hair and makeup, as well as a very tight color palette. And for Dee, one of my favorite costumes that Dee wore was the Act One Mrs. Lovett corset and apron. So I collect a lot of stuff. I always joke with my parents because I live in New York and I have an apartment that does not have uh, a lot of room. So my costumer's hoard has made it to my parents' basement. But when my grandmother passed away, I kept all of her linens, her crochet table runners and lamp, doilies and all of those sort of things. And I was able to take all these pieces and parts, and the costume shop was amazing. And we dyed them to the color palette of her corset and also of her apron. So this is a perfect example of, we wouldn't necessarily have had the time to build a corset from scratch and still get everything else done. So we purchased a corset and then we applied all of the lace individually by hand after it was dyed to the entire corset. And then we also did that with the apron. But the crafts person that season was Eric Griffiths. He was great with the dyeing, the samples, all of the shadow painting. So all of that sort of gothy highlight and shadow really played a strong part too in the overall image of the show. The other thing about hair and makeup, for Sweeney himself, I wanted to do something really unconventional. And I was thinking about the backstory of how he was imprisoned for 25 years. And what if he had never cut his hair? I sort of loved the idea of him having this kind of long anti-hero, long gray, exotic looking hair that we could do different things with, and that also sort of played into the madness of him and helped really create the world. All of the ensemble was in the tight color palette, as I started to mention, which was in kind of black and gray with pops of color that were super muted down. The whole process of creating a world, it's such a joy to really dive in and have this finished product that is a collaboration of everyone's ideas put together. It's my favorite thing about theater. The other show that season that was very special to me was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which couldn't be any more different than Sweeney Todd. So diving into that show, which was set in the 1950s, is a classic American play, has all of these sort of themes of mendacity and greed and alcoholism and sexual tension. It's also the summer that I met Eleanor Hanley, so that was a great relationship that started. The role of Maggie the cat she has these incredible monologues that are super, super long. And there's also requirements of her in the script, to be in her undergarments. And I sort of went backwards in that I wanted to figure out what was the dress that I wanted her to end up in. And I was looking at all of these 50s research images of that super sexy wiggle dress that has a sweetheart neck and a halter, which is one of my favorite 50s silhouettes. And traditionally, when you think of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, everyone thinks of like Elizabeth Taylor in the movie wearing the slip. And that comes from the fact that she starts off the play in one dress and then she takes it off, spends a lot of time in her undergarment, and then has to put on the other dress. So I thought, how cool would it be if we didn't put her in a slip and we went with the undergarments that would have been under the slip, the Merry Widow corset top, the girdle with the garter belt, and a silky robe, and have her navigate the taking that off, putting the stockings on, the whole choreography of movement at the same time that you're listening to the story and tells us something about the artifice of the time. And then we also had rehearsals with Eleanor where we went through the pieces and, you know, tried to find the right moments and how long it would take to do something. So that was a pretty special process, and I think it really helped tell the story. So in the summer of 2013, we did The Importance of Being Earnest, and that was an incredibly fun production. I had at that point done many shows with Jim Helsinger as a director, both at Pennsylvania and in Orlando. And Jim was not only directing the show, but also playing Lady Bracknell. So trying to figure out how we were going to costume a man as Lady Bracknell had its own challenges and was quite fun. The other thing I want to say about that summer and that show is give a major shout out to the costume shop, because as I mentioned earlier, you know, we have to budget our time and we have to figure out what pieces we're actually going to build and what the shop is capable of doing time wise. I'm sure they could do anything, but we're on a very limited time schedule. And that summer, we built a lot of those Victorian costumes and they were beautiful, and the shop did an amazing job. The sleeves and the lace detail, the hats, we had so much fun doing the hats. So we built all of the Lady Bracknell costumes, and everyone jokes about how we had to get the correct proportion of bosom, which was Nerf balls, Nerf footballs that had been cut down and whatnot to fill the bra. So people always love that fun fact that under that beautiful silk taffeta is a bra filled with Nerf balls. Lexi Gilmore and Aaron Parton were beautiful and so lovely, amazing actors, and also incredible to costume because they just went with it. One of my favorites was Lexi's. I mean, I loved them all, but Lexi's stripe dress that she comes to visit Cecily. Again, the shop did a great job. She had her little black tie. The Importance of Being Earnest was a very fun, very flowery, Victorian, comical costume cupcake, a delicious treat in the summer of 13. The summer of 2014, I designed Macbeth, directed by our very own Patrick Mulcahy. And the thing that I love so much about designing Shakespeare, which is one of my most favorite things about designing Shakespeare, is the limitless possibilities of the worlds that you can create. I think with musicals, you know, you have some leeway, but there's a certain level of expectation. And with Shakespeare, you can take the language and make the world up however you see it and still tell the story with, you know, incredible accuracy, even if you're set on Mars. So we decided to create a world that was contemporary, but not particularly familiar in the sense that you can't just look at it and go, oh, we're here. So in that one of the things that was the most fun about that particular production is that Patrick decided that a lot of the smaller characters would be combined into one track for one actor. So our fantastic three witches, which also included Suzanne O'Donnell and Eleanor Hanley, and Deanna, the witches played a lot of other roles. When the show opened, the Bloody Captain, and also characters like the Porter, the original Knock Knock joke. The other thing that was cool costume wise, that was like a very specific choice, was to have Susie Stevens, who I adore, was playing Lady M, and the Lady M dresses were inspired by high fashion and runway. And there was this Versace dress that was incredible silk jersey, screaming yellow. And I saw it, and for whatever reason, it just spoke to me. And I was like, I want to rethink this and have Lady M have this kind of hood. I wanted her strength to come through, mixed with her desirability. And then at the end, for her out down spot, I had her in a man's shirt, which would have been something that what we want to believe is a shirt of Macbeth's, that she just grabbed a shirt that he was wearing to cover herself. And again, with lighting and the starkness and the storytelling of the candle and this white shirt in the blackness. Again, it's so much fun to do Shakespeare and really dig into creating these different worlds every time you do it. Summer of 2017 was Evita. Again, Dennis Razzie directing it. I love Evita so much. I've always loved it. I remember seeing it when I was in the 8th grade, and the national tour was in Philadelphia, and my parents took me, and I was obsessed. So anyway, back to our Evita. We had, again, I was fortunate enough to be able to costume the lovely, exquisite, amazing Dee Racioli. A show like Evita, where, it's this famous woman, Eva Peron, and her closet of incredible clothing. So I wasn't really trying to do my own designs per se. I wanted to pick. I did so much research on her. I literally have like every image of Eva Peron that was ever available. So I went through and picked my favorite outfits. I could just go through every outfit that Dee wore, but just to maybe go to the highlights. The dress that she wore to the concert when she meets Peron, that was a vintage item. So that was a heavy satin, beautiful silk satin dress with all of that beading and sequins on it. Obviously, we would not have been able to accomplish that in the short window of time, that summer. So finding a vintage piece like that was so beautiful and, helped tell the story, that looked great on Dee. So that was a really fun find. And then when we get to Act 2, again, she has, incredible amount of costume changes. The balcony dress, we found, the Christian Dior original ad that had the original dress, and it was pink, and, it was funny having our shop make it, and it looks so beautiful on Dee and on stage. So that was pretty incredible. And then the suit, the Dior suit for Rainbow High, also the shop made. So they made a lot of things for Ava. And that one, there's lots of pictures of Ava Peron wearing that suit. Everyone thinks of Patti LuPone wearing that suit. And, our shop at PSF built that gorgeous suit. And I'd like to mention Stephen Casey, because he is magical. And as we, he choreographed the number, and we made the, trying to make the pieces go on so easily so that, Dee was able to do what she's doing and get them on. So the way that the suit jacket closed, and where the magnets were, and how the big brooch had a hidden magnet, so she could just hit it, and this big fabulous rhinestone pin, just pops on, and getting the gloves on, and the hat even. So that was a showstopper, of course. And Che, that was also, a little bit outside of the norm. I loved the idea of him as this everyman. And so he was kind of dressed not kind of, he was dressed like one of the descamisados, but I made his neck scarf red so that you would always find him. You could always find him on stage. You could find him in the crowd, and there he was. So and Paolo, I mean, getting to costume Paolo, who was just, an incredible Perone, and looked amazing. It's a production that I'm very proud of, and I loved I loved being a part of Evita. So as I mentioned early on about my first show being Midsummer, in those early years, I also got to do one show with Father Schubert, which was A Moon for the Misbegotten, which also, that's the one show that I got to design where he was directing. In the early years, I have a especially fond memory of Charlie's Aunt. That was the first show I did with Jim Helsinger directing. Dennis and I did Amadeus with Steve Burns, which was an incredible production with these, beautiful costumes. Imaginary Invalid with Wayne, Jim directed that. My Fair Lady with Dennis, another epic musical, and Alan Coates was in that. Mystery of Irma Vep, the first time and the second time with Chris and Brad. I had fun working with Matt Pfeiffer. We got to do 39 Steps together. And I can't forget Les Mis. I mean, Les Mis was epic. There were hundreds of costumes in Les Mis. One of the other main reasons that I love to come to PSF is, obviously I've mentioned all of the friendships. That's amazing. And earlier I mentioned about having production meetings where we really have time. We start early and we have time to think about the show and the collaborative process. And I have been fortunate enough to work on a number of Broadway shows over the years, living in New York and making my career in New York and working on Broadway. And shows like An American in Paris and School of Rock and Hair and Rent, and recently Freestyle Love Supreme, which was super fun to design, and working on Six right before the shutdown happened. But there is a certain pace, there's a certain intensity to that type of environment. And there's something about being able to come to PSF and start the process early, and really, the joy of, as designers, creating the show and having time for it to like sink in, and collaborate with your other design team members and the director to create that. And I love working on Broadway. I'm super grateful for it. It's so much fun. But, PSF definitely has an element of old school theater where we're like, let's really dive in, and it's not steamrollered through. In today's busy world, except for coronavirus, you're always trying to, get everybody's schedules together, and who has time for this and that. And there's something about the Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival that just makes creating theater, coming to theater, all of it, like such a joy. So PSF has my heart for sure.